Welcome to Creepy Horror Tales. I'm so glad you're here. This channel is your go-to spot for spine-chilling stories that thrill and captivate. While our tales may be scary and spooky, they're also perfect for those moments when you want to relax and embrace a little excitement. So, settle in, let the eerie atmosphere wash over you, and enjoy the delightful chills that await. I should have known better, but alright, so this happened last year, and I still get the chills every time I think about it. I don't know what got into me, but yeah, I guess I wanted to prove to myself, and to Jake, that I could handle a bit of a thrill. Jake has been my friend since high school, always the adventurous one. He's the guy who actually likes the creepy stuff, the one who convinces everyone else to do the things they know they probably shouldn't. One night, we were just hanging out, doing our usual thing, when he started talking about this place called Haddon's Bridge. Now, let me set the scene for you. This bridge is way out on the edge of town, not exactly close to anything. I'd heard about it before, but it never really seemed like more than a half-baked ghost story kids would tell around campfires. Jake, though, he had that glint in his eye, the one he gets when he's about to talk you into something. He starts going on about how this bridge is cursed or something. Says there's some urban legend where people go to Haddon's Bridge, usually on a dare, and, well, some don't come back. He told me stories of people disappearing, just gone like they'd never existed. And then there were the ones who did make it back, but didn't want to talk about it. Come on, Jake says. Why don't we check it out? Just for a few minutes. He grins, giving me that bet you won't look. At first, I wasn't having any of it. I mean, I've heard too many stories about stuff like that. But after a while, Jake finally talked me into it. He dared me to go alone, just me and a flashlight, and I thought, I don't know, maybe it'd be a laugh. So, just after midnight, I found myself standing at the edge of this old, rundown bridge, alone, with just a crappy flashlight and nerves I could practically hear. There was no moon that night. The sky was just a thick blanket of dark, and everything around me was dead quiet. I could hear every step I took, crunching the gravel under my boots, and I swear every sound seemed louder than it should be. The bridge itself was old, like the kind of old where you could feel every single board creak under your feet. Half the railings were missing, and the metal parts that were left were all rusted out. There was graffiti everywhere, random names, dates, symbols I didn't recognize. I remember thinking how weird it was that anyone would bother tagging this place, considering how out of the way it was. I walked to the middle of the bridge and looked around. There was nothing out there, just pitch black water below and this stretch of forest that seemed to go on forever. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was just a dumb story, but there was this, I don't know, feeling like I was being watched, not in the paranoid way, but in the someone's actually out here with me way. I remember stopping and shining my flashlight around, even though it barely lit up anything. And then I heard it, a soft crunch like someone stepping on dry leaves behind me. I whipped around, shining my flashlight, and called out, "Jake, is that you?" My voice came out shaky, even though I was trying to sound tough. But there was nothing, just the trees swaying a little in the breeze. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or something. But then I heard it again, this time closer. And then something weird happened. My flashlight started to flicker. I hit it against my hand a few times, but it kept dimming, just enough to make me feel like I was in complete darkness half the time. I wasn't sure if I should just laugh it off or start running, but I didn't run. Not yet. Anyway, I figured I'd prove to Jake I could handle it. So, I kept walking, slowly, right to the center of the bridge. That's where the air felt different, colder, even though it was a summer night. I heard the crunching sound again, and I swear it was right behind me. But every time I looked, there was nothing. That's when I started getting the chills. Not just from the cold, but this, I don't know, dread, like I had to leave. I'm not the kind of person who gets freaked out easily, but this was different. And just when I was about to turn around and call it quits, I heard someone say my name. Not a shout, more like a whisper, but close enough that it felt like they were right next to my ear. Dan, I froze. I looked around, my flashlight barely working, and there was still no one there. But then I saw something just a few feet away from where I was standing. It was like a shadow, but not the kind of person would cast. This shadow was wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, like it didn't belong there. And it was moving, coming toward me. I didn't think twice. I just turned around and started walking fast back toward the edge of the bridge. I didn't want to seem like I was scared out of my mind, but every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there. But then I tripped. I remember feeling my foot catch on one of the broken planks, and I went down hard. My flashlight flew out of my hand and rolled to the side. The beam pointed straight up, casting long shadows on everything around me. I scrambled to get up, my hands shaking as I grabbed for the flashlight. I felt this intense need to keep moving, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling like the ground itself was holding me down. And then I felt it, a cold, heavy pressure on my shoulder, like someone had laid a hand on me. I froze, barely breathing, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might give me away. I don't know how long I sat there, feeling that pressure on my shoulder, but it felt like forever. And then, just as suddenly as it came, it was gone. I jumped up, grabbed the flashlight, and ran. I didn't care about looking back. I didn't care about trying to be tough anymore. I just ran. The path back to the car was overgrown, all twisted roots and branches that seemed to reach out, snagging in my clothes as I stumbled through. I swear, every time I thought I was far enough, I'd hear it. The crunching sound, those faint whispers, just on the edge of hearing. And then, when I finally reached my car, I saw something scrawled on the hood. At first, I thought it was just dirt or something, but then I realized it was a handprint, smudged, like someone had pressed their palm there and slowly dragged it down. I didn't even stop to catch my breath. I threw myself into the driver's seat, locked the doors, and sped out of there. It wasn't until I was back in town that I pulled over, heart pounding, and just sat there, staring at the handprint on the hood, too freaked out to go home. The next day, I told Jake what happened, half expecting him to laugh or say I was imagining things. But he didn't. Instead, he got quiet, like he was thinking about something he didn't want to say out loud. Finally, he told me he'd heard stories about Haddon's Bridge, about people hearing their names called, seeing shadows, and feeling like they weren't alone. He told me about a guy who went there alone a few years back, and well, he didn't come home. They found his car a few miles from the bridge, with his phone and wallet still inside, but no sign of him. Jake said that some folks think the bridge doesn't let everyone leave, that if you go there alone, you might just become part of the legend. I don't know if I believe that, but I do know one thing: I'll never go back there again. And if anyone dares you to check it out, I'd think twice. After that night, I tried my best to forget about it. I avoided driving out that way, and anytime Jake brought it up, I changed the subject. But no matter how much I tried to move on, things started happening that I couldn't ignore. The first time, it was just little things like the feeling that someone was watching me, even in broad daylight. I'd be walking to my car or leaving work, and this creeping sensation would crawl up my spine. At first, I thought it was just paranoia from the bridge incident, but it didn't stop. One night, about a week later, I was lying in bed when I heard it. My bedroom window was open a crack, just enough to let in a little breeze. I was dozing off when I heard footsteps outside. At first, I thought it was someone walking their dog or something, but the steps were slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing back and forth, right under my window. I lay there, barely breathing, listening. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the footsteps stopped. I waited a few seconds, then a few minutes, but there was nothing. Finally, I convinced myself it was my imagination, or maybe a cat or raccoon outside. But just as I started to relax, I heard it again, only this time it was different. This time, I heard someone whisper my name, just like at the bridge. Damn, it was so faint, I almost thought I was dreaming. But then it happened again, a little louder and closer. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, and ran to the window, slamming it shut. I backed away, watching the window like I expected something to come through. I stayed up the rest of the night, staring at the window, waiting, but nothing happened. Over the next few days, things got worse. I started noticing strange marks around my house, small smudges, almost like handprints, on my windows and doors. I tried to clean them off, but the next day, they'd be back in different places. At one point, I even saw one on the mirror in my bathroom, a faint outline of a handprint that looked like it had been pressed against the glass from the inside. The more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. One night, I was taking out the trash when I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving along the side of my house. It was tall and thin, just like the shadow I'd seen at the bridge. I froze, staring at it, my heart pounding. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The shadow moved, sliding along the wall, until it disappeared around the corner. I ran inside, locked the door, and turned on every light in the house. I checked all the locks, closed all the curtains, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something was waiting for me, just out of sight. A few nights later, I finally broke down and told Jake. He listened, not saying a word, just nodding, his face serious. When I finished, he didn't laugh or tell me I was imagining things. Instead, he looked at me and said, I think it followed you home. He told me he'd heard about something like this happening before, years ago. Another guy had gone to Haddon's bridge on a dare, and afterward, strange things started happening to him. He'd see shadows, hear whispers, and feel like he was being watched. And then, one day, he just disappeared. No one knew where he went, but his car was found parked near the bridge. Jake's story freaked me out, but I tried to laugh it off, saying it was just a coincidence. But then he said something that made my blood run cold. He looked me right in the eye and said, I heard that once you've been to the bridge, it doesn't let you go. It follows you, watching, waiting. And if you're not careful, you end up like the others. I tried to brush it off, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was right. That whatever I'd seen on the bridge hadn't stayed there. That it had followed me, waiting for something. A few nights later, I was home alone, watching TV, trying to take my mind off everything. I'd almost managed to convince myself that it was all just in my head when the power went out. Just like that. 1 second the lights were on, and the next total darkness. I sat there, heart racing, trying to stay calm. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight, and looked around. The whole house was pitch black, and every shadow seemed to stretch, moving in the faint glow of my phone. And then I heard it, that whisper, closer than ever. Dan. It was right behind me. I spun around, shining the light, but there was no one there. Just my empty living room, shadows flickering on the walls. But I could feel it, this heavy, cold presence, like someone was standing right there, watching me. I didn't wait to see if it would happen again. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door, not even bothering to lock it. I jumped in my car and drove, not caring where I was going, just needing to get as far away as possible. I ended up at Jake's place, banging on his door like a madman. When he finally opened it, he took one look at me and knew. He didn't ask any questions, just let me in, locked the door, and made me sit down. We talked for hours, trying to figure out what to do. Jake suggested going back to the bridge, maybe trying to confront whatever was there. But the thought of going back made my skin crawl. I didn't want to see that place ever again, let alone go back there. In the end, we decided to do nothing, hoping that if I just stayed away from the bridge, whatever was haunting me would eventually go away. But it didn't. Every night, I'd hear it, the footsteps, the whispers, the feeling of someone standing just out of sight. And every morning, I'd find new handprints around my house, like someone was marking their territory, claiming me. The worst part was the dreams. Every night, I'd dream I was back at the bridge, standing in the middle, with the water rushing below me and the trees looming all around. In the dreams, I'd feel that presence moving closer until it was right behind me. And then, just as I was about to turn around, I'd wake up, covered in sweat, heart pounding. It's been months now, and the dreams haven't stopped. The whispers haven't stopped. And every time I close my eyes, I feel like I'm back on that bridge, waiting for something I can't escape. I don't know how much longer I can take this. After those first few months, I thought maybe things would start to settle down, like maybe it was all some kind of stress response to the whole dare. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work, spending as much time with friends as possible, even taking a few days off to stay at my parents' place. But the bridge was always on my mind, lurking there, no matter what I did. And I swear, every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear it, just that faint whisper, right at the edge of hearing, like it was inside my head. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I was tired of feeling like I was being hunted, like something was watching me every second. I told myself it was all just in my mind, that it couldn't hurt me if I didn't let it. I'd read about people confronting their fears, and I figured maybe if I went back, if I faced whatever was haunting me, I could make it stop. So, that night I got in my car and drove. I didn't tell anyone, not even Jake. I knew he'd try to stop me, talk me out of it, but I was done being scared. I just wanted my life back. It was a little after midnight when I pulled up to the edge of the road leading to Haddon's Bridge. I could barely see anything beyond my headlights, but I could feel it. The silence, that heavy, suffocating quiet that just pressed down on me. I sat there for a minute, gripping the steering wheel, trying to psych myself up, telling myself it was just a bridge, just an old, rundown bridge with a bunch of stupid ghost stories attached to it. I took a deep breath, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out of the car. The walk to the bridge felt longer than I remembered, even though it had only been a few minutes. Every step seemed to echo, and I kept hearing these little noises, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. My heart was pounding by the time I reached the bridge, and I had to remind myself over and over that I was alone, that no one else was out here. But when I got to the center of the bridge, I froze. The air felt colder there, like I'd stepped into a freezer, and my breath came out in little white puffs. I shined my flashlight around, sweeping it across the bridge, half expecting to see someone or something standing there. And then I saw it. Right there, on the wooden planks in front of me, was a handprint. Faint, like someone had pressed their hand down in dust, but unmistakable. I stared at it, feeling a chill run down my spine, and then I noticed something else. There were more handprints, leading away from the center of the bridge, disappearing into the darkness. My mouth went dry, and I had to force myself to breathe. This was a bad idea. I should have just turned around and gone home. But I couldn't move, couldn't make myself turn away. Something about those handprints drew me in, like I had to see where they led. So, I followed them, step by step, my flashlight barely cutting through the darkness. The handprints went off the bridge, down a narrow trail that I hadn't noticed before, hidden by overgrown bushes and tangled branches. The path twisted and turned, leading deeper into the trees, and every step I took felt heavier, like something was pulling me in, like I was crossing some invisible line I shouldn't cross. Eventually, I reached a clearing, and in the middle of it was some kind of structure, not a house. Exactly, more like an old shack, barely holding together. The wood was rotting, covered in moss, and one of the windows was broken, with jagged shards of glass sticking out. I don't know what possessed me to keep going, but I couldn't stop myself. I walked up to the shack, my footsteps crunching on the dead leaves, and pushed the door open. It creaked, loud and slow, like it hadn't been opened in years. Inside, it was dark and cold, colder than it had any right to be. and there was this smell, musty and damp, with a hint of something metallic, like rust or old blood. I shined my flashlight around, taking in the scene. The place was a mess. Broken furniture, old newspapers scattered on the floor, a bunch of crumpled photographs, faded and yellowed with age. I picked one up, and I felt my stomach twist. It was a picture of a man standing in front of Haddon's Bridge. He was smiling, but his eyes, there was something off about his eyes, something vacant, hollow. I dropped the photo and stepped back, but my foot hit something soft, and I nearly tripped. I looked down and realized I'd stepped on a pile of clothes, crumpled and filthy, like they'd been there for years. And that's when I saw it, a pair of shoes sticking out from under the clothes, as if someone had just slipped them off and walked away. I don't know why, but that image stuck with me. The shoes perfectly still, like they were waiting for someone to put them on. I backed away, heart pounding, and that's when I heard it again. Dan. The whisper was right next to me, like someone was leaning in, breathing in my ear. I whipped around, shining my flashlight, but there was no one there. The door was wide open, showing only darkness outside, and I could feel this presence, this heavy, suffocating weight pressing down on me. I bolted. I didn't care about being quiet, didn't care if I tripped. I just ran, crashing through the trees, feeling branches clawing at my arms, my face. The path twisted, winding back and forth, and I swear, no matter how fast I ran, I could still hear it, the sound of footsteps just behind me, keeping pace. When I finally burst out of the trees, back onto the bridge, I felt a moment of relief. I was almost safe, almost out, but then I heard it again, that whisper, louder this time, right in my ear. Dan. I didn't look back. I just ran, sprinting across the bridge, feeling every board creak under my feet, every step echoing in the silence. And then, just as I reached the end, I felt it, a hand, ice cold, grabbing my shoulder, pulling me back. I screamed, wrenching myself free, and stumbled forward, hitting the ground hard. I scrambled to my feet, too scared to look back, and ran to my car. I could barely get the key in the ignition. My hands were shaking so bad, but somehow I managed. I threw the car into drive and peeled out, speeding down the road, not caring about anything, but getting as far away as possible. When I finally got home, I locked every door and window, closed every curtain, and sat in the corner of my room, shaking, too terrified to sleep. And that's when I saw it, my reflection, staring back at me from the darkened window. Only it wasn't my reflection. There, in the glass, was a shadow, standing just behind me, its face hidden, its hand reaching out. I turned around, but there was nothing there, just the empty room, silent and still. But I knew it was still with me, watching, waiting. Since that night, I haven't been able to shake the feeling. I keep seeing shadows, hearing whispers, feeling that cold hand on my shoulder, no matter where I go. I tried talking to Jake, but he doesn't understand. No one does. They all think it's just some kind of trauma, something I'll get over eventually. But I know the truth. I know that whatever I brought back from Haddon's Bridge isn't going to let me go. It's waiting, lurking in the shadows, watching me. And I have no idea what it wants or how to get rid of it. Every night, I lie in bed, listening, waiting, knowing that sooner or later it's going to come for me. And when it does, I don't think I'll be able to stop it. Weeks passed, and I'd barely left my apartment. The feeling of being watched was constant, so thick it was like trying to breathe underwater. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper sent my heart into overdrive. I stopped sleeping more than an hour at a time, too afraid to let my guard down. And when I did fall asleep, the dreams were always the same. Me, standing on that bridge, hearing my name whispered over and over. But one night, things took a turn I couldn't ignore. It was around 3 a.m., and I was jolted awake by a strange sound, something soft and scraping coming from the living room. I lay there, holding my breath, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks again. But the sound continued, steady, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a baseball bat I kept by the bed, and tiptoed down the hallway. The sound was getting louder, more distinct, and I could feel my pulse racing as I approached the living room. My hand was shaking as I gripped the bat, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn around, to leave, but I couldn't. I had to know. When I finally rounded the corner, I froze. There, on my living room floor, was a trail of wet, muddy footprints leading from my front door all the way to the center of the room. The footprints were large, almost too big for any normal person, and they left smudges and streaks of grime across the hardwood floor. My stomach turned, and I felt bile rise in my throat. The worst part? The footprints didn't end. They circled around the room, looping and crisscrossing, like someone had been pacing, over and over. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the bag, and that's when I noticed something else. The window. I'd locked it, I was sure of it, but now it was open, just a crack. A cold breeze drifted in, carrying with it the faint smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. I wanted to believe it was a break-in, that maybe someone had messed with me, but I knew, deep down, that wasn't the case. This wasn't some random intruder. This was something else, something that wanted me to know it could get inside, that it wasn't bound by any door or window. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my room, lights on, waiting for morning. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to go back into the living room, hoping maybe it had all just been some twisted nightmare. But the footprints were still there, dried and crusted on the floor, a chilling reminder that I hadn't imagined any of it. After that night, things escalated. The whispers became louder, more frequent. I'd hear my name in the middle of the day, clear as someone speaking right next to me, but there'd be no one there. My lights would flicker at odd hours, even though I'd had the wiring checked twice. And every time I passed by a mirror, I'd see movement out of the corner of my eye, like something lurking just beyond the glass. One night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get some answers, even if it meant going back to the bridge. I called Jake, told him everything, and begged him to come with me. He was reluctant at first, said it was a bad idea, that I should just leave it alone. But eventually, he agreed, and we made plans to head out there the next night. The entire day leading up to it, I felt sick to my stomach, like my body knew something was about to go terribly wrong. I couldn't eat, couldn't focus. All I could think about was the bridge, the whispers, and the feeling that I was walking straight into a trap. By the time night fell, I was a nervous wreck. Jake picked me up around midnight, and we drove in silence. Neither of us wanted to say what we were both thinking. When we finally reached the road leading to the bridge, Jake parked the car, and we got out, flashlights in hand. The walk to the bridge felt different this time, heavier. Every step seemed to echo, bouncing back at us in the stillness. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted and gnarled, casting long, jagged shadows across the path. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, and every instinct was screaming at me to turn back. But I pushed on. When we reached the bridge, I stopped, staring at the spot where I'd seen the handprints that first night. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and I could feel that same chill creeping over me. Jake stood next to me, silent, his face pale in the moonlight. After a few moments, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded, even though every part of me wanted to say no. I didn't know what I was looking for, exactly. Maybe some kind of closure, or a way to break whatever was haunting me. But I had to try. We walked to the center of the bridge, the boards creaking under our weight. The air grew colder, and I could feel my skin prickling. like something was watching us. I turned to Jake, about to suggest we head back, when I saw it. A shadow, standing at the far end of the bridge, just barely visible in the darkness. It was tall and thin, its outline blurry and shifting, like it was made of smoke. I felt my blood turn to ice, my whole body freezing as I locked eyes with it. Or at least, where its eyes would have been. Jake saw it too, and I heard him suck in a breath, his flashlight trembling in his hand. We stood there, paralyzed, neither of us daring to move. And then it started to walk toward us. Its steps were slow, deliberate, each one echoing through the stillness. I could feel this overwhelming dread washing over me, this crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. I wanted to run, to get as far away as possible, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure stopped a few feet away, just on the edge of the flashlight's beam. I could make out more details now. The hollow eyes, the gaunt, almost skeletal frame, and the way it seemed to flicker in and out, like it was struggling to stay in our world. Then it spoke. Damn. The voice was low, almost guttural, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I felt Jake grab my arm, his grip tight, and I knew he was just as terrified as I was. But we couldn't move, couldn't look away. "Why did you come back?" it asked, its voice thick with something I couldn't place. Anger, maybe, or hunger. I didn't know how to respond, didn't even know if I could. My mouth was dry, my throat tight, and all I could do was stare, trapped in its gaze. The figure took another step forward, and I could feel the temperature drop, the cold seeping into my bones. It raised a hand, reaching out, and I felt an intense, almost overwhelming urge to step forward, to let it touch me. But Jake yanked me back, breaking whatever hold it had on me. He grabbed my arm and shouted, "Run." We turned and bolted, sprinting across the bridge, the sound of our footsteps echoing like gunshots. I could hear something behind us, a scraping, dragging sound, like it was following, gaining on us with every step. When we finally reached the end of the bridge, we didn't stop. We ran down the path, stumbling over roots and rocks, not daring to look back. The whole time, I could feel it right behind us, that heavy, suffocating presence pressing in, clawing at the edges of my mind. We burst out onto the road, practically diving into Jake's car. He slammed the door, and we sped off, neither of us daring to speak, too terrified to even look at each other. When we finally made it back to my apartment, we sat there in silence, trying to catch our breath, our minds racing. Jake broke the silence first, his voice shaky. "Well, what was that?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that it wasn't over, not by a long shot. Whatever was on that bridge, whatever had followed me, wasn't going to stop. And I had a feeling that next time, I might not be able to escape. Since that night, I've felt it even stronger. The whispers, the shadows, the feeling of being watched. Every night, I lie awake, listening, waiting, knowing that it's only a matter of time before it finds me again. And when it does, I don't think I'll be able to run. After that night, I realized that whatever was haunting me from Haddon's bridge was not going away. It was only getting worse. Jake stopped coming around, probably too scared to be near me. I couldn't blame him. I would have distanced myself if I could. Every friend I'd once leaned on became a stranger. Even my family noticed that something was off. My mom would call, leaving worried voicemails about how I sounded different or asking why I hadn't visited in months. But I couldn't let them in on what was happening. How could I explain it? I was barely holding on myself. A few weeks later, the whispers changed. They became clearer, no longer just calling my name, but telling me things. Dark things, twisted things. Some nights, I'd hear it whisper, "You're mine," over and over, like a lullaby meant to break me. Other times, it would laugh, this low, guttural sound that echoed around my empty apartment. I tried everything to get rid of it. Burning sage, leaving all the lights on, even sleeping with the radio blaring, but nothing worked. The more I tried to ignore it, the more intense it became. One night, I decided I couldn't handle being in my apartment alone. It was a Friday, and I thought maybe if I stayed at a hotel in the city, somewhere crowded and alive, it would give me some peace. I checked into a cheap place downtown, a couple of blocks away from anything familiar. For the first time in months, I felt almost safe. But around midnight, just as I was beginning to relax, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, figuring it was my mom or maybe Jake checking in. But when I looked at the screen, it was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something compelled me to pick up. I held the phone to my ear, heart pounding, barely able to breathe. And then I heard it. Dan. The voice was soft, low, but unmistakable. I hung up immediately, my hands shaking, and threw my phone onto the bed, but it didn't stop. A second later, my phone buzzed again, the same unknown number flashing on the screen. I let it ring, watching in horror, paralyzed, as it rang over and over until it finally stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse because it was filled with an emptiness, a sense that something was waiting, lurking just on the other side. The phone didn't ring again that night, but I couldn't sleep. I just sat there, staring at the walls, jumping at every little noise, feeling that presence creeping in, filling every corner of the room. The next day, I checked out as soon as I could, not even waiting for sunrise. I drove aimlessly, too afraid to go home, but too tired to keep going. Eventually, I found myself parked in front of a 24 Hours diner, staring blankly at the neon sign, feeling utterly lost. That's when I noticed someone in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, some trick of the light. But as I looked closer, I realized it was a figure, standing just behind my car, barely visible in the dim light. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt that same cold chill wash over me. I blinked, and the figure was gone, but I could still feel it, watching me, following me. I sat there, frozen, for what felt like hours, too afraid to move. Finally, I forced myself to get out of the car and go into the diner. I ordered coffee, hoping it would snap me out of whatever was happening. The place was nearly empty, just me and an older couple a few booths away. The waitress was polite enough, but I could tell she noticed something off about me by the way she kept glancing over, giving me that worried, pitiful look. I drank my coffee in silence, staring down at the cup, trying to ground myself. But when I looked up, my heart nearly stopped. Sitting across from me, in the booth right in front of me, was my own reflection. Or at least, it looked like me. The man in the reflection had my face, my clothes, everything down to the last detail. But his eyes were empty, hollow, like two black pits staring straight into my soul. He smiled a slow, twisted grin that made my skin crawl. I looked away, gripping the edge of the table, trying to keep from screaming. When I looked back, the booth was empty. That was it for me. I threw some cash on the table and bolted, ignoring the waitress's concerned calls, racing back to my car. I locked the doors and sat there, panting, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. The drive home was a blur. I barely remember it, just flashes of street lights and the empty road stretching out in front of me. When I finally stumbled into my apartment, I was exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open. I collapsed onto the couch, too tired to even make it to my bed. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, I was standing on the bridge. Only this time, it was different. The air was thick, heavy, pressing down on me like a weight. The trees around the bridge were twisted, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. And the water below, it was black, darker than anything I'd ever seen, swirling like it was alive. I tried to move, to run, but I couldn't. My legs felt like they were glued to the ground, and all I could do was stand there, staring down into the water, feeling that presence all around me. And then I heard it, That voice, low and whispering, coming from the darkness below. Dan, come closer. Against my will, I felt myself leaning forward, drawn toward the edge of the bridge. My heart was pounding, every instinct screaming at me to stop, to pull back, but I couldn't. I leaned closer and closer until I was staring directly into the water, my reflection staring back at me. But it wasn't me. The face in the water was twisted, distorted, with those same hollow eyes, that same sick grin. It reached out, its hand breaking the surface, fingers like claws reaching up, pulling me down. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. It took me a few moments to realize I was in my apartment, safe, or at least as safe as I could be. But when I looked down at my hands, I froze. They were wet, like I just pulled them out of a freezing river. The nightmares didn't stop after that. Every night, I found myself back on that bridge, staring into the water, feeling that pull, that overwhelming urge to step forward, to let it drag me under. I tried everything to break the cycle, sleeping pills, therapy, even driving out of town, hoping distance would make it stop. But it didn't matter. No matter where I went, it followed. The worst part was I could feel it getting stronger, the pull becoming harder to resist. I knew it was only a matter of time before I wouldn't be able to fight it anymore, before I'd end up like those other people who dared to go to the bridge and never came back. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. Every day feels like a battle. Every night a slow descent into madness. I don't eat, barely sleep, just drift through the days, haunted by the knowledge that it's waiting for me, biding its time. I haven't seen Jake in weeks. Last I heard, he left town, said he couldn't take it anymore. I don't blame him. If I could leave, I would, but I know, deep down, that it wouldn't make a difference. No matter where I go, it will find me, and I don't know how to stop it. All I know is that, sooner or later, I'm going to have to face it. And when that time comes, I don't think I'll be able to run. A month passed in this endless cycle of fear, dread, and exhaustion. My nights were spent wide awake, listening for the slightest sound, praying that maybe it would lose interest, that maybe it would move on. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. Every day it grew stronger, invading every moment of my life. And then one night, it all came to a head. I'd managed to drift off on the couch, too worn out to care about what I'd see when I closed my eyes. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd get a reprieve from the nightmares. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't on the couch anymore. I was back on the bridge. This time, though, it wasn't the distorted, nightmare version. It looked exactly as it had the first night I was dared to go there. The broken boards, the rusted railings, the pitch black water below. I could hear the wind rustling through the trees, the faint creak of the old wood under my feet. Everything was silent, so unnaturally still that even the faintest sound seemed to echo. And then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from the other end of the bridge. I tried to move, to turn and see who or what it was, but I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the spot, my body frozen as the footsteps drew closer and closer. And then, out of the darkness, it appeared. The figure was tall and thin, almost skeletal, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were empty, hollow pits, dark and endless, and its mouth twisted into a sick, knowing grin. It was like staring at a distorted version of myself, a version that had been twisted and broken beyond recognition. It stopped just a few feet away, those hollow eyes fixed on me, and I felt a chill settle over me, a cold so deep it seemed to seep into my bones. And then, in that low, raspy voice I'd come to dread, it spoke. "Dan, you can't escape." I tried to scream, to back away, but my body wouldn't respond. I was trapped, completely at its mercy, and all I could do was stare as it reached out, its hand stretching toward me. Its fingers were long, bony, tipped with nails that looked like claws, and I could feel the cold radiating from them as they got closer and closer. Just as its fingers brushed my shoulder, I woke up, gasping, drenched in sweat. I was back on my couch, my heart pounding, my entire body shaking. But something was wrong. The room was dark, pitch black, and the air was ice cold, colder than it had ever been before. I reached for the lamp, my hand shaking, but it wouldn't turn on. None of the lights would. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen was dead. I was completely alone, surrounded by darkness, and I could feel it. Him watching me. And then I heard it. Footsteps, slow and steady, coming from somewhere in the apartment. I could barely breathe, my heart pounding so loud it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. The footsteps got closer, each one echoing through the silence, until they stopped just outside the living room. I held my breath, frozen, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting, and then, in the darkness, I saw it. The shadow, standing in the doorway, its hollow eyes fixed on me, its mouth twisted into that same sick grin. It was closer than ever before, so close I could see every twisted, grotesque detail, and I knew, in that moment, that it was real. This wasn't a dream, wasn't some nightmare. It was here, in my apartment, and there was no escape. It took a step forward, and I scrambled back, my back hitting the wall as I tried to put as much distance as possible between us. But it kept coming, slow and deliberate, its eyes never leaving mine. "Dan," it whispered, its voice filling the room, cold and empty. "You belong to me." I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst, but nothing happened. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. The room was empty, silent, and the lights flickered back on, casting a dim, eerie glow over the room. I sat there, too shaken to move, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But I knew the truth. It wasn't going to stop. It was only a matter of time before it came back, before it finally got what it wanted. After that night, I stopped going to work. I barely left my apartment, too afraid that if I stepped outside, it would follow me, that I'd lead it to someone else. My days blurred together, a never-ending cycle of fear and isolation, each night worse than the last. I tried to call Jake, desperate for some kind of help, but he wouldn't answer. My texts went unanswered, my calls ignored, and I began to wonder if he'd left town, if he'd run as far as he could to escape the curse of Haddon's Bridge. One night, as I sat in the darkness, too afraid to sleep, I heard a knock at the door. My heart leapt, both terrified and hopeful, wondering if it was Jake, if he'd come back to help me. I stumbled to the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle, and slowly opened it. But there was no one there, just the empty hallway, stretching out in both directions, silent and still. I stepped out, looking around, hoping maybe it was a neighbor or someone passing by, but the hallway was empty. And then I saw it, a single muddy footprint, right outside my door. I stumbled back, slamming the door shut, my heart racing, my mind spinning. It was here. It had found me, and there was nowhere left to run. I spent the next few days in a daze, barely eating, barely sleeping, just waiting for the inevitable. Every night, I'd hear it. The whispers, the footsteps, the cold, suffocating presence filling every corner of my apartment. I was trapped, completely at its mercy, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it came for me. And then one night it did. I was lying in bed, too exhausted to stay awake, when I felt it, a cold hand on my shoulder, heavy and unforgiving. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, my voice trapped in my throat as the hand tightened, pulling me down. I opened my eyes, and there it was, standing over me, its hollow eyes staring down, its mouth twisted into that same sick, mocking grin. "Dan," it whispered, its voice echoing through the silence. "It's time." I don't know what happened after that. I remember darkness, a suffocating cold, and the feeling of being pulled down, deeper and deeper, until I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't feel anything but that overwhelming, crushing dread. When I woke up, I was back on the bridge. The sky was dark, the air thick with fog, and I could hear the water rushing below, a constant, relentless roar. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond, my feet rooted to the spot, my mind trapped in a haze of fear and confusion. And then I saw it, standing at the other end of the bridge, waiting for me. The figure was tall, thin, twisted, its hollow eyes fixed on me, its mouth stretched into that same mocking grin. It took a step forward, then another, each step slow and deliberate, as if savoring every moment. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything, but I couldn't. I was trapped, completely at its mercy, and all I could do was stand there, frozen, as it got closer and closer. When it was just a few feet away, it stopped, its eyes boring into mine, its voice a low, guttural whisper. "You can't escape, Dan. You're mine forever." And then it reached out, its hand cold and unyielding as it wrapped around my wrist, pulling me down into the darkness. The last thing I remember is the sound of the water, the cold rushing over me, and the feeling of being dragged under, deeper and deeper, until there was nothing but darkness. When I woke up, I was back in my apartment, alone, the silence pressing down on me, suffocating. But I knew the truth. It had marked me, claimed me, and there was no escape. Every night, I hear it, the footsteps, the whispers, the feeling of that cold hand on my shoulder, pulling me back, reminding me that it's only a matter of time before it comes for me again. And when it does, I know I won't be able to resist. It's been weeks since that last encounter. I wish I could say things have changed, that maybe it was a one-time thing, but I know better now. Every single night, without fail, it comes back. The whispers, the footsteps, that freezing hand on my shoulder. Every time I try to tell myself it's just a nightmare, that maybe it's all in my head, but deep down, I know it's real. I feel it. This isn't just some twisted dream. It's a warning. Since that night on the bridge, something feels different. It's like a piece of me was left there, something vital, and without it, I feel hollow, empty. I've stopped sleeping entirely now, terrified that if I close my eyes, I'll find myself back there, that I won't make it out the next time. Food has no taste. The colors around me seem faded, muted, like I'm drifting through some shadowy half-world. I tried reaching out to Jake one last time, but his number is disconnected. I thought about driving over to his place, but the idea of being outside, of seeing someone else, feels too overwhelming. I'm terrified I'll bring it with me, that whatever's latched onto me will find a way to spread. So I stay locked inside, hidden away, hoping maybe it'll lose interest, that maybe it'll give up and move on. But it doesn't. In fact, it's getting worse. The first time I noticed, it was subtle. My reflection lingering a second too long in the mirror, or a shadow in the corner of my vision that didn't match up with anything in the room. It's like whatever's following me is gaining a foothold in my world, finding ways to slip through the cracks. And I know, in my gut, that it's only a matter of time before it breaks through completely. One night, after days of no sleep, I sat down at my kitchen table, feeling drained and defeated. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I grabbed a pen and a scrap of paper and just started writing. It was like something was guiding my hand, like the words were being pulled out of me. I wrote down everything I could remember about that night, every detail about Haddon's bridge, the figure, the feeling of being watched. When I finished, I stared at the page, my heart pounding. The words felt foreign, like they didn't belong to me. But there, at the very bottom of the page, In a handwriting that wasn't mine were the words, "Come back, Dan. Come home." My blood ran cold. I tore the page out, crumpled it up, and threw it in the trash. But even as I sat there, staring at the garbage can, I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me, filling the room with that same oppressive silence. I knew what it wanted. It wanted me back on that bridge, where it could finally take me, finish whatever it started. And part of me felt drawn to it. I thought maybe I could ignore it, that if I stayed locked up in my apartment, it would go away. But that only made things worse. The next night, I heard it louder than ever, that voice echoing through every corner of my mind, filling every silence. "Come home, Dan." The whispers were relentless, constant, like a dripping faucet that I couldn't turn off. I covered my ears, tried to drown it out with music, but nothing worked. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in this endless loop of fear and desperation. And then, one night, as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, too terrified to close my eyes, I heard the front door open. My heart stopped. I hadn't left my apartment in days. The door was locked, the windows sealed. But as I lay there, paralyzed, I heard the slow, deliberate creak of the hinges, followed by the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing through the silence. The footsteps grew louder, closer, each one sending a jolt of terror through me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as they stopped just outside my bedroom door. For a long, agonizing moment, everything was silent. And then, slowly, the door creaked open. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that whatever it was would leave, that it would disappear if I didn't look. But I could feel it standing there, its presence filling the room, that cold, suffocating dread washing over me. And then, I felt it, a hand, cold and heavy, pressing down on my shoulder. My skin prickled, my heart racing, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was trapped, completely at its mercy, and all I could do was lie there, waiting as its grip tightened, digging into my skin. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, that I would pass out from the terror, the hand released me. I opened my eyes, gasping for breath, and the room was empty. The door was closed, the air still, but I could feel it. The room was thick with that lingering, oppressive silence, like a warning, a promise of what was to come. After that, I knew I couldn't stay there. Whatever was haunting me wasn't going to leave. It was only a matter of time before it took me completely. And so, against every instinct, I did the one thing I swore I would never do. I went back to Haddon's Bridge. It was a cold, moonless night when I found myself standing at the edge of the bridge, staring into the darkness. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisted and reaching, casting long shadows across the ground. The air was thick with fog, and I could barely see a few feet in front of me, but I could feel it, that presence, waiting, watching just beyond the edge of the light. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and stepped onto the bridge. Every step felt like a betrayal, like I was willingly walking into a trap. The boards creaked under my feet, echoing through the silence, and with each step, the air grew colder, heavier. I could feel my heart pounding, my skin prickling, but I kept moving, drawn by something I couldn't explain, an invisible force pulling me forward. When I reached the center of the bridge, I stopped, staring out into the darkness. The water below was black, swirling, and I could hear it whispering, calling to me. "Come home, Dan." The voice was everywhere, surrounding me, filling every silence. I felt a chill run down my spine, and for a moment, I thought about turning back, running as far as I could, but something held me there, something stronger than fear. And then, out of the darkness, it appeared. The figure was exactly as I remembered. Tall, thin, its skin stretched tight over its bones, its eyes hollow, empty. It stopped a few feet away, its gaze fixed on me, and I felt that familiar dread, that suffocating weight pressing down on me. "Why did you come back?" it asked, its voice a low, guttural whisper that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't have an answer. I didn't even know why I was there, only that I couldn't stay away. The figure took a step forward, and I felt myself backing up, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to run. But it was too late. I was trapped, completely at its mercy, and I knew, in that moment, that there was no escape. It reached out, its hand cold and unyielding as it wrapped around my wrist, pulling me forward. I struggled, tried to break free, but its grip was too strong, its presence too overwhelming. And then, as I looked into its hollow eyes, I saw something, a glimpse of another world, a dark, twisted place filled with shadows and despair. I saw myself, standing on the edge of the bridge, staring into the darkness, my face twisted in fear. And in that moment, I realized the truth. I was never going to leave. I was part of this place now, bound to it, trapped in an endless loop of fear and despair. The figure pulled me closer, its grip tightening, and I felt myself slipping, fading, as the darkness closed in around me. I could hear the water rushing below, feel the cold seeping into my bones, and I knew, deep down, that this was the end. And then, just as everything went black, I heard it one last time. "Welcome home, Dan." When I woke up, I was alone on the bridge, the air still, the silence oppressive. I looked around, disoriented, my mind struggling to make sense of what had happened. But as I stood there, staring out into the darkness, I felt a strange sense of calm, a sense that somehow I belonged there. I turned and walked back to my car, my mind blank, my heart heavy. I don't know what I saw that night, or if any of it was real. All I know is that, since then, I haven't felt that presence, haven't heard the whispers or felt the cold touch on my shoulder. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when everything is silent and still, I feel a strange pull, a quiet call, like a whisper just beyond the edge of hearing, drawing me back to the bridge. And deep down, I know that one day I'll go back, because Haddon's Bridge isn't just some place you visit and leave behind. It's part of me now, woven into my thoughts, my dreams, like it has some piece of my soul that I'll never get back. Every part of my life is split into before and after that night, and there's no undoing it, no escape. I'm tethered to it, even when I try to move on. The days following that last night at the bridge were quiet, almost deceptively normal. The whispers stopped, and the suffocating feeling of being watched faded. I'd wake up in my apartment and not feel that familiar weight on my chest, or that cold hand pressing into my shoulder. For a moment, I thought it was over. I could almost believe I was free, but it didn't take long to realize it had left something behind. At first, it was subtle, a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of my eye, the faintest sound of my name when I was alone. I'd feel the weight of that presence lurking just beyond reach, watching like it was waiting for something. I told myself it was just the memory of that night haunting me, that I was making it up. But no matter how many times I tried to push it down, it was always there. Then, the dream started again. Every night, I'd find myself back on the bridge, standing in the middle, staring out into the endless darkness. The fog would roll in, thick and heavy, shrouding everything, and I'd feel it, that same pull like invisible hands reaching out, urging me to step forward. And every night, I'd wake up just before I crossed the edge, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, that it couldn't hurt me. But each time I woke up, the feeling lingered, clinging to me like a second skin. That cold, unshakable dread settling deep in my bones. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, some kind of closure, something to break this connection to Haddon's Bridge once and for all. So, against every ounce of common sense, I started looking into the history of the place, digging through old news articles, local legends, anything that might help me understand what I'd seen. I spent hours scouring online forums, scrolling through half-baked theories and whispered rumors, piecing together fragments of stories from people who claimed to have felt that same pull. Most of it was useless. Ghost stories, urban legends about people who'd gone missing, tales of cursed bridges and restless spirits. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. It was an old newspaper article, buried in the archives of a forgotten local news site. The headline read, "Man found dead at Haddon's Bridge, believed to be the 5th victim in 10 years. The article was brief, with only a few vague details. But there was something about it that struck me, something that felt too familiar. The man's name was David Hensley, a local mechanic in his early 30s. Friends said he'd become obsessed with Haddon's Bridge in the weeks leading up to his death, talking about it constantly, claiming he could hear voices calling his name at night. The last anyone saw of him, he was walking out to the bridge alone, late at night. They found his body the next morning, floating in the water beneath, his face twisted in a final, silent scream. I stared at the article, feeling a cold chill creep down my spine. The details were too similar to ignore. The whispers, the feeling of being watched, the unshakable pull back to the bridge. It was like looking into my own future, a warning of what was to come if I didn't break free. But there was something else, something hidden between the lines. Buried at the bottom of the article was a quote from a local historian, a woman named Margaret Ellis. She mentioned that the bridge had been built in the early 1900s as part of a project that was never completed. According to local legend, one of the workers had gone missing during construction, vanishing without a trace. Some believed his spirit still lingered, trapped between worlds, forever tied to the bridge. It wasn't much, but it was the only lead I had. So, I tracked down Margaret, hoping she might know something, anything, that could help me break the hold Haddon's Bridge had on me. When I finally found her, she was an old woman, frail and hunched, with a piercing gaze that seemed to see right through me. I explained my situation as best I could, watching as her expression shifted from curiosity to concern, and finally, to something that looked like pity. She told me that the bridge had always had a dark reputation, even before it was finished. Over the years, people had reported strange occurrences, whispers, shadowy figures, the feeling of being pulled toward the edge. A few brave souls had ventured out there to test the legend, but most never returned, and those who did were changed. She leaned in close, her voice barely a whisper. "You should never have gone there alone," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "Once the bridge has you, it doesn't let go. It'll follow you. Wait for the right moment to pull you back." I asked her if there was any way to break the connection, to free myself from whatever had latched onto me. She shook her head, looking down, almost regretful. "There's only one way to end it," she said finally. "You have to confront it. Go back to the bridge. Face whatever's waiting for you. But know this. Once you go back, there's no guarantee you'll come out." I left her house in a daze, her words echoing in my mind. I knew what I had to do, even if every instinct was screaming at me to turn back, to run as far as I could. But I was tired of running, tired of living in fear, of feeling like a shadow of myself. If facing it was the only way to end this, then I was ready. The next night, I found myself standing at the edge of Haddon's Bridge, staring out into the darkness. The air was thick, heavy, filled with that familiar sense of dread, and I could feel it watching me, waiting. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and stepped onto the bridge. The boards creaked under my weight, each step echoing through the silence, and with every step, I I felt that pull growing stronger, urging me forward. By the time I reached the center, the air was so cold I could see my breath, and the darkness seemed to press in on all sides, suffocating, relentless. I stood there, staring out into the void, feeling that presence all around me. And then slowly it appeared. The figure was just as I remembered, tall and thin, its hollow eyes staring straight into mine, its mouth twisted into that same mocking grin. It stopped a few feet away, and I felt a chill run down my spine as it spoke, its voice low and hollow. "You came back," I swallowed, my throat dry, barely able to form the words. "What do you want from me?" It tilted its head, studying me, and for a moment, I thought I saw something human in its gaze, a flicker of something ancient, broken, and bound to this place. "You know what I want," it said, its voice a whisper that cut through the silence. "You never should have come here, Dan. But now that you have, you belong to me." I took a step back, my heart pounding, but it reached out, its cold, skeletal hand wrapping around my wrist, pulling me forward. I struggled, tried to break free, but its grip was too strong, its pull too powerful. And then, as I looked into those hollow eyes, I saw it, flashes of faces, people who had stood on this same bridge, who had felt that same pull, who had been dragged down into the darkness, one by one, lost to the endless void. I saw Jake, standing on the bridge, his face twisted in terror as he reached out for help that would never come. I saw David Hensley, the man from the article, staring into the water, his eyes wide with fear as the figure pulled him under. And then I saw myself. The figure leaned in, its voice a cold, empty whisper. "You're home now, Dan. Forever." In that moment, I knew there was no escape. I was part of this place, bound to it, trapped in an endless cycle of fear and despair. The bridge had claimed me, just as it had claimed so many others before me, and there was nothing I could do to break free. The last thing I remember is the sound of the water, the cold rushing over me, pulling me down, deeper and deeper, until there was nothing but darkness. And now I wait. I wait on the bridge, watching, listening, feeling that familiar pull, that whisper calling me back again and again. And every time I hear someone's footsteps approaching, I know they're coming for me. They're coming to take my place, to break the cycle, to free me from this endless nightmare. But until then, I'll be here, waiting, watching, forever bound to Haddon's Bridge. Days, weeks, maybe even years have passed since I became part of Haddon's Bridge. Time doesn't work the same way here. It's like an endless night, where the moon never rises, and the sky hangs low and heavy, cloaked in that same thick fog. I don't get cold anymore, and I don't get tired. I don't even think I'm human, not fully. I feel like I'm suspended between two worlds, a shadow waiting in the mist, watching as people pass by, drawn toward the bridge. The worst part is, I'm not alone. I can see them, the others who have been claimed by the bridge. Some stand in the shadows by the trees, half hidden by the fog, their eyes hollow and vacant, as if all the light has been sucked out of them. Others drift just beneath the water, their faces occasionally breaking the surface, their mouths open in silent screams. They're here because they didn't listen, because, like me, they ignored the warnings, convinced themselves they could beat the pull. And now they're bound to this place, just like I am, forever trapped in a loop of terror and regret. Every so often, someone new appears on the bridge. They wander across, hesitating in the middle as they feel that same eerie presence, that pull drawing them closer to the edge. Most of them turn back, their footsteps echoing into the night as they walk away, blissfully unaware of how close they came to joining us. But every now and then, someone stays. One night, I see a man, maybe in his late 20s, standing alone on the bridge. He's wearing a hoodie and jeans, his head down, hands stuffed into his pockets. He looks familiar, and I realize with a chill that he reminds me of myself. All those years ago, just another skeptic, another dare-taker who thought they were invincible. He stands there for a long time, looking down into the water, his expression blank. I watch him, feeling that old, familiar urge to call out, to warn him to leave while he still can. But the words die on my lips, swallowed by the fog. I know it's useless. Even if he heard me, it wouldn't matter. The bridge has already marked him. He shivers, pulling his hood up, glancing around like he senses something watching him. For a moment, his eyes lock onto mine, and I see a flicker of fear cross his face. He takes a step back, but it's too late. I can feel the bridge tightening its grip, pulling him in, and then he hears it, the voice. Low, quiet, calling his name just like it called mine. David. I feel a pang of recognition, realizing that the bridge is using my voice, my memory, as the bait. It calls his name again, and he takes a hesitant step forward, his eyes wide, caught between fear and curiosity. I want to scream at him, to tell him to run, but I'm powerless, bound to this cycle, just another echo in the darkness. David inches closer, his gaze fixed on the water, drawn to the inky blackness swirling beneath the bridge. He's almost at the edge now, his face inches from the water, his hands gripping the railing. I can see the bridge tightening its hold on him, its shadows wrapping around him like tendrils, pulling him closer, deeper. He stumbles, his hands slipping, and for a moment, I think he might break free. But then he hears the voice again, calling him back, whispering his name over and over, each time more insistent, more urgent. David. He takes one last, hesitant step, and then he's gone, pulled under by the unseen force, vanishing into the water without a sound. I watch as his figure disappears, swallowed by the darkness, his final scream lost to the void. And just like that, he's part of the bridge, another soul bound to its twisted, insatiable hunger. Days blend into nights, and the cycle continues, a relentless loop of fear and despair. I watch as people come and go, some escaping, others claimed, all of them leaving a piece of themselves behind. I can feel the bridge growing stronger, its influence spreading, reaching out into the world beyond, pulling in more and more souls, feeding on their fear, their regrets, their secrets. And then one night, I see her, someone I haven't seen in years. My heart twists as I recognize the figure standing on the bridge, her face half hidden by the fog. It's my mother. She's older now, her hair streaked with gray, her face lined with worry. She clutches a flashlight, her hands shaking as she shines it across the bridge, her eyes searching, desperate. I can hear her calling my name, her voice breaking with every syllable. Dan? Dan? Are you here? I want to reach out, to tell her to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I can't move, can't speak. I'm trapped, watching helplessly as she walks further onto the bridge, her steps hesitant, her face pale. The bridge senses her, recognizes the connection, and I can feel its excitement, its hunger, as it tightens its grip, drawing her closer. It whispers my name, using her voice this time, calling out from the shadows, luring her deeper into its trap. Dan, come back, Dan. She freezes, her face contorted with fear, but she doesn't leave. Instead, she takes a step forward, her eyes scanning the darkness, her voice trembling as she calls my name again. Dan, please, if you're here, show me a sign. I need to know you're okay. I can feel the bridge pulling her in, wrapping its shadows around her, binding her to its will. And I know, in that moment, that if she doesn't leave now, she'll be claimed, just like I was, forever trapped in this endless cycle of horror. Desperate, I gather every ounce of strength I have, forcing myself to speak, to break through the fog, to reach her. "Mom, go," I whisper, my voice barely a breath, carried by the wind. "Please go." She stops, her eyes widening as she hears my voice, her face twisted with confusion and grief. I can see her heart breaking, her mind torn between wanting to stay and the primal instinct to run. "Dan," she whispers, her voice barely audible. "Is that you?" I want to reach out, to hold her, to tell her everything will be okay. But I know it won't. I know the bridge won't let her go, not now that she's here, so close, so vulnerable. "Go," I whisper again, my voice breaking. "Please just go." For a moment, she hesitates, her eyes searching the darkness, her heart fighting against the terror gripping her. But then, finally, she nods, taking a shaky step back, her face wet with tears. "I love you, Dan," she whispers, her voice choked with sorrow. "I'll never forget you." And then, she's gone, her footsteps fading into the night, leaving me alone on the bridge, consumed by an overwhelming sense of loss and regret. As I watch her leave, I feel the bridge tighten its hold on me, its anger palpable, seething, as if punishing me for letting her go. And in that moment, I realize the truth that I'm bound to this place, not just by my actions, but by the bridge itself. It won't let me go, not now, not ever. And so, I wait in the shadows, watching, listening, feeling that familiar pull as more and more souls are drawn to the bridge, each one leaving a piece of themselves behind, just like I did. Some escape, their footsteps echoing into the night, oblivious to the danger they've just avoided. But others aren't so lucky, and with each new soul, I feel the bridge grow stronger, its influence spreading, reaching further into the world, pulling in more and more, feeding on their fear, their regrets, their secrets. Because Haddon's Bridge isn't just a place. It's a force, an entity, ancient and insatiable, bound to the shadows, feeding on the darkness within us all. And once it has you, it never lets go. So if you ever find yourself on the edge of town, staring down that empty, fog-shrouded road, and you hear a whisper calling your name, turn back. Don't look, don't listen. Because if you step onto that bridge, if you feel that pull, it will claim you, just as it claimed me, just as it claimed countless others before. And when it does, you'll become part of the endless night, forever trapped in the shadows, waiting, watching, until the next soul wanders into the darkness. Because Haddon's Bridge never lets go. In the timeless dark of Haddon's Bridge, I feel everything and nothing at once. Time no longer exists here in the way it used to. Days, hours, even years blur together, and the passing of moments is only marked by the faint whispers of the bridge, like echoes rippling through a vast, empty cavern. But I know when someone new comes to the bridge, I feel them in my bones, in the deep hollows where my humanity once was, like a flicker of warmth, a reminder of what it was to be alive. And so I wait, not in anticipation, but in resignation, because I know the pull of the bridge can't be resisted. I know that sooner or later, another soul will come, just as I did, drawn by curiosity, fear, or some lingering regret they hope to bury. They'll feel that faint whisper in their mind, calling them closer, and before they know it, they'll be here, standing in the center of the bridge, caught in the web. Each time, I try to warn them. I want to scream, to reach out and tell them to run while they still can. But my voice is just a faint breeze, swallowed by the mist and silence, just another ghostly breath lost to the night. Instead, I am forced to watch, a helpless spectator, bound to this cursed place by chains that feel as unbreakable as the bridge itself. One night, I sense a presence on the bridge, a young girl, no older than 20, her face hidden beneath a hoodie, her hands shaking as she grips her phone like a lifeline. She moves slowly, cautiously, her footsteps light but trembling. I watch her from the shadows, feeling the bridge tighten its hold around her, wrapping her in an invisible embrace that she's too afraid to acknowledge. The bridge begins to whisper to her, softly at first, just a faint murmur in the back of her mind. I see her pause, her face pale, her eyes wide as she glances around, her mouth forming silent questions. She can feel it, just like I did, the weight, the pull, the sense that something is wrong, that she shouldn't be here. But she doesn't leave. I want to shout at her, to warn her, to tell her to turn back. But the bridge has already begun to work its magic, drawing her closer, feeding off her fear, her hesitation. She takes another step, and then another, inching her way toward the center of the bridge, her gaze fixed on the water below. It's only when she reaches the middle that she stops, frozen, her eyes wide, her breath visible in the cold night air. I can feel her terror, the rapid beating of her heart, the way her mind is racing, trying to make sense of what she's feeling. And then she hears it, the voice. This time, it isn't my voice, or even her own. It's something darker, older, a voice that seems to come from the bridge itself, echoing through the mist, filling every empty space with its presence. Come closer. She flinches, her hands shaking, her phone slipping from her grasp and clattering to the ground. She takes a step back, her breathing shallow, her eyes darting around as if searching for the source of the voice. But there's nothing there, just shadows and silence, stretching out on all sides. Don't be afraid. The voice is soothing now, almost hypnotic, like a lullaby that lures her in, wrapping her in a cocoon of false safety. She's trying to resist. I can see it in her eyes, the way she bites her lip, clenching her fists, fighting the urge to move closer. But it's no use. The bridge has her now, its invisible tendrils snaking around her, pulling her forward, step by step. She leans over the railing, staring into the water, her face reflected in the dark, swirling depths. For a moment, she sees herself staring back, her own wide-eyed reflection gazing up at her. But then, slowly, the reflection begins to change. Her face twists, warps, her eyes hollowing out, her mouth stretching into a grin that doesn't belong to her. She recoils, stumbling back, her heart racing, her hands covering her mouth as she struggles to breathe. But the reflection doesn't disappear. It just watches her, grinning, its empty eyes filled with a dark, twisted satisfaction. Come join us. The voice is louder now, more insistent, and she can't resist. She steps forward, her movements stiff, robotic, like she's being controlled by some unseen force. I can feel her terror, the way her mind is screaming, but her body isn't listening. She reaches the edge of the bridge, her hands gripping the railing, her eyes wide and empty. And then, in one fluid motion, she climbs onto the railing, her body teetering on the edge, her gaze fixed on the water below. I want to reach out, to grab her, to pull her back, but I'm bound, just another shadow in the mist, watching helplessly as she surrenders to the bridge's pull. The last thing I see is her face, twisted in horror, as she plunges into the darkness, disappearing beneath the surface without a sound. Once she's gone, the silence returns, heavier than before, pressing down on me like a weight I'll never be able to lift. The bridge is satisfied for now, its hunger sated by another lost soul. But I know it won't last. It never does. I don't know how long I stand there, staring into the water, lost in the memories of my own descent, my own surrender to the bridge. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I see movement, a figure standing at the edge of the bridge, watching me with an intensity that sends a shiver down my spine. It's the girl, but she's different now. Her eyes are hollow, empty, her face pale and expressionless, her body barely visible in the mist. She's one of us now, another soul bound to the bridge, forever trapped in the shadows, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to stumble upon our prison. She doesn't speak, doesn't move, just stands there, staring at me with a look that I can't quite place. It's almost as if she blames me, as if she knows that I'm just as much a part of this curse as the bridge itself. And maybe she's right, because in some twisted way, I am the bridge now. I am part of its endless cycle, a silent sentinel, watching and waiting, feeding it with each new soul that joins our ranks. I am the whisperer that lures them in, the shadow that watches them from the mist, the cold hand that reaches out in the darkness. And as I stand there, watching her fade into the fog, I realize the truth. There's no escape, no end, no release. Haddon's bridge has claimed me, just as it has claimed countless others before me. And it will continue to claim more, one by one, until it has taken everything, consumed everyone, leaving nothing but shadows in its wake. So if you ever find yourself standing at the edge of Haddon's bridge, feeling that faint pull in the back of your mind, that whisper calling your name, turn back. Don't look, don't listen. Run as fast as you can and never look back. Because once you step onto that bridge, once you feel its cold grip around your heart, there's no turning back. You'll be part of it, bound to the shadows, waiting, watching, forever lost in the mist. And when your time comes, when the bridge finally claims you, you'll understand the truth. The bridge was always there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for you. And once it has you, it never lets go. As the days turn into endless nights, I lose all sense of who I once was. My memories of a life before the bridge feel distant, hazy, like they belong to someone else. It's as if I've been erased, rewritten by the bridge, transformed into just another shadow lurking in the mist. The others, those who came after me, they're here too, drifting along the edges, bound to the bridge just like I am. We never speak, never acknowledge one another. We're prisoners, lost souls who can do nothing but wait in the darkness. The bridge is never satisfied for long. Every few weeks, another victim arrives, drawn in by curiosity, by fear, by that strange, unexplainable pull that lures them to this place. Each time, I feel the same helplessness, the same rage as I watch them walk into the trap, their footsteps echoing through the fog. I want to warn them, but my voice has no power here. All I can do is watch as the bridge claims them, one by one, their final screams swallowed by the night. One night, as I drift along the edge of the bridge, lost in my own despair, I sense a new presence approaching. I can feel it even before they step onto the bridge. A familiar warmth, a heartbeat that I know all too well. My heart sinks as I realize who it is. Jake. He's older now, his face lined with worry, his eyes haunted. He looks around, hesitant, clutching a flashlight, his shoulders tense, as if he can sense that something isn't right. I watch him from the shadows, a mix of anger and sorrow building inside me. He shouldn't be here. He should have stayed away, kept himself safe. But the bridge is relentless, pulling him in just as it did to me. He calls my name, his voice trembling. Dan? Dan, are you here? I want to respond, to tell him to turn back, to leave before it's too late. But the bridge has me in its grip, holding me silent, bound by its dark power. I watch helplessly as Jake steps onto the bridge, his eyes scanning the shadows, searching for any sign of me. Dan, if you're here, please give me a sign. Let me know you're okay. I can see the fear in his eyes, the way his hand trembles as he grips the flashlight. But he keeps moving forward, driven by something stronger than fear, a need for answers, a need to understand what happened to his friend. I know exactly how he feels. It's the same curiosity, the same determination that brought me here all those years ago. But I also know where it leads. Jake, I try to whisper, but the words die in my throat, lost in the fog. I feel the bridge tightening its hold on me, silencing me, forcing me to watch as Jake inches closer to the center. And then he hears it. The bridge whispers his name, using my voice, calling to him from the darkness. Jake? He freezes, his eyes wide, his face pale. For a moment, he glances around, as if he's realized the trap he's walked into, as if he's on the verge of running. But the bridge is too strong, its pull too powerful. I can see it in his eyes, the struggle, the hesitation, and finally, the surrender. He takes a step forward, drawn toward the voice, his movements slow, almost trance-like. Jake, come closer. He stumbles, his flashlight slipping from his hand and rolling across the bridge, its beam flickering as it comes to a stop at the edge. He reaches out, his hand hovering over the water, his gaze fixed on something just beneath the surface. I know what he sees. I know what he feels. It's the same cold, unyielding presence that claimed me, that claimed every soul before me, binding us to this cursed place. I want to scream, to break free, to pull him back, but I'm powerless, trapped by the same force that's pulling him under. And then he looks up. For one fleeting moment, our eyes meet, and I see a flash of recognition, a spark of the friendship we once shared. His face twists in horror as he realizes what's happening, as he understands the truth. Dan, he whispers, his voice barely audible, filled with a sorrow that cuts through the darkness. I'm so sorry. And then, before I can reach him, before I can save him, he's gone, swallowed by the bridge, pulled under by the same cold, suffocating darkness that claimed me. I feel the bridge's satisfaction, its hunger sated, its hold over me loosening just enough for me to move. But it's too late. Jake is gone, just like I am, just another soul lost to the bridge, bound to the shadows forever. The days blur together, an endless cycle of loneliness and regret. I don't know how long I drift through the darkness, trapped in a limbo that feels like it has no end. I watch as more souls are drawn to the bridge, each one falling victim to the same cruel fate, each one joining the ranks of the lost. But then, something changes. One night, I feel a new presence approaching the bridge, a presence that's different from all the others. It's stronger, brighter, filled with a warmth that I thought I'd forgotten. And as it draws closer, I realize with a jolt of recognition who it is. My mother. She's older now, her hair streaked with gray, her face lined with worry. But her eyes are filled with a fierce determination, a strength that I didn't expect. She steps onto the bridge, her step steady, her gaze unwavering, as if she knows exactly what she's walking into. I feel a surge of panic, a desperate need to reach out, to stop her from taking another step. I try to move, to break free from the bridge's hold, but it's too strong, its power too overwhelming. I watch helplessly as she walks toward the center, her eyes scanning the darkness, her face calm, resolute. Dan, she calls, her voice soft but steady. I know you're here. The bridge begins to whisper, using my voice, calling her name, trying to lure her in. But she doesn't falter. She stands her ground, her gaze fixed on the shadows, her expression filled with a calm defiance. Dan, she says again, her voice filled with love and sadness. I'm here to bring you home. I feel the bridge tightening its grip, trying to silence me, to hold me back. But her presence gives me strength, a warmth that cuts through the darkness, breaking the chains that bind me. For the first time since I became part of this cursed place, I feel a glimmer of hope, a chance to escape. "Mom," I whisper, my voice trembling. "Please go. You don't belong here." She looks up, her eyes meeting mine, and I see a flash of recognition, a spark of the love that brought her here. She smiles, her face filled with a quiet determination, and reaches out her hand, holding it out toward me. "Come home, Dan," she says softly. "It's time to let go." I feel the bridge fighting, its grip tightening, trying to pull me back. But her hand is warm, solid, a lifeline in the darkness. I reach out, my fingers brushing hers, and for the first time in what feels like eternity, I feel whole, complete. The bridge roars, its power surging, trying to pull me back, to hold me in its endless cycle of fear and despair. But her love is stronger, a force that breaks through the darkness, shattering the chains that bind me. And then, just like that, I'm free. I stumble forward into her arms, feeling the warmth of her embrace, the steady beat of her heart. The bridge fades behind me, its whispers silenced, its power broken. I feel the darkness lifting, the fog dissipating, replaced by a warmth, a light that fills every corner of my soul. We stand there, mother and son, reunited at last, free from the bridge's grip. I can feel the weight of the years falling away, the memories of my time on the bridge fading, replaced by a sense of peace, of freedom. As we walk away from Haddon's Bridge, I feel a quiet satisfaction, a sense of closure that I never thought I'd find. I know that I'll never forget what happened, that the memories will linger, a reminder of the darkness I faced. But I also know that I'm finally free, that I've escaped the bridge's curse, that I've found my way home. And as we leave the bridge behind, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude, a quiet, unspoken thanks to the love that saved me, that broke through the darkness and brought me back to the light. Because Haddon's Bridge may have claimed many souls, but in the end, love was stronger. Love was the one thing it could never take, the one force that broke its hold and set me free. And as we walk away, leaving the bridge in the darkness, I know that I'll never look back.